Hi, this is Rich and welcome to Wings, Wheels, and Wires. So recently I was able to attend the Electrify Expo event in Long Beach, California. It was really great. I'm going to do a general video about it that I'll put out in about a week or two. Now, Electrify Expo has multiple events all over the country. What makes Long Beach slightly different from the other events is that at Long Beach you have the Saturday and Sunday public days that you have at all the other events. And on Friday you have what's called Industry Day. The tickets for that are a lot more expensive. They're like $350, and the people who attend this are generally people attached to the EV industry and the media. So I was attending that and I went through, and the big thing that you're paying for there is to listen in on the panels. So what my goal is here is to do videos where I actually play the videos that I recorded of the panels and kind of give my insights on them. So the very first one is, what's it going to take to drive EV adoption in the Heartland? The speakers for this are Mark Dipko, who is the head of EV product marketing and strategy at Ford, Terry Kidd, who's the general manager and owner of Chatworth Ford, Tyson Jomini, who is the VP of Data and Analytics at JD Power, Steve Kosowski, who is Long-Range Planning and Strategy for Kia, and Sean McLean, who's from the Wall Street Journal. All right, so we'll play this and I'll kind of give you some insights on it. I was actually not particularly excited about this topic, not that I have anything against the Heartland at all, but I don't know, I didn't really see where the Heartland would be any more or less important for EV adoption in any other part of the country. But as we go through the video, you see where this is actually kind of important.
Well, good morning, and thanks for coming out. We've got a good panel of highly intelligent people here. We're going to explain what's the biggest mystery of the EV industry. I think you've all heard the stats about the ideal EV owner. They charge at home, they have more than one car, they're probably a homeowner. Well, that's more likely to describe somebody in Middle America, Nebraska, Kansas, Georgia, than it is somebody in LA. But EV ownership is, new car sales. It's about 3% of new car sales in 2023 were EVs in Nebraska, about 20% in the US. So what's going on?
All right, so that's something that I hadn't considered. The EV adoption, there's a lot more of it on the coast and in big cities. But in big cities, as I've mentioned in some of my other videos, you're more likely to have people who live in apartments. So the actual percentage of buyers who could actually support having the EV because they have their own home charging, it's actually a lot lower in the cities than it would be in the Heartland, because most people have their own property, have their own driveway, probably enough room for several EVs to park, and can easily set up the charging for it. So I could see where that is an important piece, where that's actually, when you look at the way EVs are meant to be used, that is the place that really should or would best benefit from them. Now let's get back to it.
So I want to throw it to Steve first. Steve, what gives? Why aren't people in Middle America buying EVs? Do they even want one? What does this mean for the EV market?
It's a combination of factors. Probably the principal one would be the income to price ratio. It's probably the most important part. If you look across the industry at who buys EVs, what their income is, it's more than 200,000. It's between 200 and 250 as an average. But if you look at the proportion of Heartland states' income, that factor is much lower. In fact, on the coasts, high-income earners are about 48 or 50% higher. In other words, there's more high-income consumers on the coast. That's a very important part.
Yeah, you see, that is definitely one of the things. I mean, I've long since stated that one of the things that really gets in the way of people adopting EVs is the price. There's always this question, even a video I'm thinking about making someday, do people really want EVs? And it's not whether they do or don't want EVs, it's can they afford them? Yes, the total cost of ownership is lower, but the cost of buying one is more expensive. And if they can't afford to get one, it doesn't matter if it'll be perfect for them or not. they're just not going to. And this number of you having to make more than 200,000 to own an EV is really high. And as he says, there's just not that many people that are in that range. I mean, especially if you talk about the cost of living out there, right? I mean, yeah, people make more in California, but we also pay a lot more. So I would hope that you wouldn't have to make that much in Middle America to be able to afford an EV, just because the total cost of living is lower. But unfortunately, when you talk about the price of the EV being here and your cost of living, whether it goes up or down, the cost of the vehicle is still there. So it's probably proportionally more expensive for them than folks in California.
On the other hand, you would look at things like home ownership, right, which is a principal factor in owning an EV these days. 87% of Heartland buyers have a house. Electricity prices are cheaper, so that aligns. But then you kind of go back to where the majority of those buyers want to transact, and that's probably between $30,000 and $40,000, maybe about $35,000. You know, if you look at vehicles like the Sportage, the CRV, the RAV4, that's the sweet spot in the market. They transacted about $35,000. EVs are $60,000, $61,000. So you have a big disconnect from a pricing standpoint.
Yeah, see, that's the thing. The average purchase price there is $35,000. Realistically, about the only EV you can afford for that, at least new, would be like a Chevy Bolt, right? And unfortunately, currently, that Chevy's only really selling what's left of the 2023 inventory. I know it's supposed to come back supposedly in 2026, but in the meantime, that's not meeting people's needs, right? And of course, you have pickup trucks, which are now the big thing for EVs, but they're ridiculously expensive. When you talk about the median income out there compared to out here, there's no way they're paying $60,000 for an electric pickup truck. It just isn't going to happen. Now let's get back to it.
There's other factors too, Sean, that go into this, like mindset, right? There's a little bit different approach to the environment on the coast versus Heartland. So those are some really important factors.
Mark, what do you think? Do you have to be rich to own an EV?
You know, I think Steve presents that overview of the market, and I think there's a lot of truth to that. Right? When you look overall in aggregate, how customers, you know, what they're looking for and how they're evaluating the value of the vehicle. But I think what we see as well, Ford's very strong in the middle of America. Right? When we see our customers coming in, they are looking for that value, and it's not just simply comparing TCO, which has now come down. It's gotten a lot better when you actually.
Yeah, I think that's an important point. We talk about what you said is TCO, which is total cost of ownership, right? And that's always been kind of the hard selling point for EVs. Is you have the cost of the vehicle, and then you have the cost to own, or the cost to purchase the vehicle, and the cost to own the vehicle, right? You might spend, say, $5,000, hypothetically, $5,000 a year for a gas vehicle between oil changes and other maintenance and gas, and you may only spend $1,000 that same year for an electric vehicle for electricity. But it's kind of hard to actually present that because the number's not right there in front of you, right? You can see the $10,000 extra in the price tag of the vehicle for the gas version versus the electric, but you can't see that long-term savings. I know that's one thing that Tesla does that is smart and also a little shady, that when you go on to their website, they have the price of the vehicle with gas savings. So it does kind of a good job of presenting how the total cost of ownership factored into the price. It also is, if somebody's not paying attention, also a little disingenuous, because they'll go, wait a minute, I thought the car was 37. They're like, oh, well, instead of 48. And I'd be like, oh, well, we factored in the gas savings. It's like, well, that's not the price. But it does do a really great job of making it clear to people that they are coming out ahead based on, I think it's 5 years of ownership that Tesla uses for that. All right, let's get back to it.
A lot of those factors that existed in the early majority and early adopter, changed with the early majority, but we're seeing that the products and the pricing come down to where they can actually see a real value.
that true, Terry? Are these incentives and price cuts starting to make a difference in the dealership?
It is. We have a place where the rubber meets the road. And the three things that we deal with most in selling EVs are range anxiety, charging anxiety, which are two totally different things.
I think that's a really good point right there, because he separated out range anxiety from charging anxiety. And this is a very, very valid concern that people in middle America probably have. Because, see, range anxiety honestly isn't as big a deal as people try to make it out to be. And most of the time when people talk about range anxiety, what they're really talking about is charging anxiety. And what I mean by that is you're able to charge at home. You have a 300-mile vehicle. Even in the Midwest where you may have to, or if you're out like on some farm or something, you have to drive really far to get to the nearest town, you're still not going to probably put more than 300 miles in a single day on that. And when you get home, you throw it on the charger overnight. But if you do have to travel farther than your range, where is a charger? Because here in the, like for example, on the California coast, we are very spoiled by having chargers absolutely everywhere. But I can tell you, for example, when we went up to San Francisco, we went via San Luis Obispo. So we went up the Pacific Coast Highway on the way up there. There were chargers like every mile and a half, almost the entire way up. On the way back, we came down the I-5. There was about a quarter of those. And this is still in California. Now, when you talk about getting into Arizona, Nevada, stuff like that, chargers get even more scarce. And so that charger anxiety is a real thing that I would imagine should really factor into people's decision to buy an EV if they live in areas that just don't have the infrastructure yet. Back to the video.
And then as Mark was talking about, total cost of operation. And that's our job as dealers, because the product's fantastic. They're well designed, they drive exceptionally well, and the customers are new to this lifestyle. I mean, think about it. I know when I was young, I used to dream about having my own gas station at my house. Well, I drive an EV, my wife drives an EV, and I have my own gas station at my house. Over 90% of my charging occurs at my house. So it works out for us. It saves me money in the long run, my total cost of operation, and it's very easy for me to approach customers.
We hear this total cost of operation calculation a lot from car makers and from EV advocates saying, well, if you do the math on savings on gas and maintenance, then yeah, owning an EV is as cheap or cheaper than owning a gas car. But do people care about that? Do car buyers care about that? What's going on?
Yeah, thanks everyone. Excited to be here under the bright lights of the Cybertruck back there. Total cost of ownership is how we should be thinking about it, but I don't think consumers get it. It should be something that we should be able to explain, whether it's at the dealership or whether it's in our OEM marketing messages. The total cost of ownership is cheaper. Right now, at J.D. Power, we see that's about 7% cheaper to own an EV than a comparable ICE vehicle today in the market. So we got to convey that message, but
Only 7%? I actually thought it would be a lot cheaper than that. I know I myself, the savings have been more like 40% cheaper, but I guess each person their own situation. Also, if you are maybe comparing that to very efficient small gas vehicles or even hybrids, then the gap will probably narrow a little bit. But 7% still seems kind of low to me. What do y'all think? Put that in the comments. Does that sound right to you? All right, well, let's go back to it.
a Corolla hybrid, it's a $1,400 option over a gas Corolla. And a dealer should be able to explain that to a consumer with a pencil and a piece of paper, right? Look how this pencil's out. You could get a payback on a Corolla hybrid in 23 months. Who would take that, right? I mean, it seems to make sense. Your payback period is under 2 years. Lessees, owners, everyone gets it. And yet, the take rate for hybrids on Corollas is somewhere in the 20% range. So we're not talking about even something as simple as that. We can't explain to consumers well. And now when we're selling an EV, we're going, oh yeah, well, you have to buy a charger. How much does that cost? Well, I don't know. And you have to have it installed. I don't know how much that is either. And you may get tax credits from the state or your local and your utility. There's all these new things, these new conversations to have. And yet, we can't even sell the simple stuff right now. We really need to tune up our marketing.
And there we go. That's why I said consumers don't necessarily get that. If you're into EVs and you've factored it in, you've already researched it, you kind of get it. But it's not until you own an EV that you can actually go, oh wow, this is a lot cheaper. But that's after you already own one. So when you're trying to move into a market that only has 3% new vehicle purchases being EVs, and folks aren't necessarily even going to see an EV for long periods of time to actually be able to understand how they operate and understand that savings, it's kind of hard to understand something like that. Kind of like my wife and I've driven cross country before, and my wife and I a few years ago drove across country I-8 over the I-10 over to Florida. And I had told her, when we were planning our stops, I was like, well, we're going to have 2 stops in Texas. She's like, well, why are we going to stop twice in Texas? I'm like, because Texas is really big. And she's like, oh, okay, whatever. But 2 stops? It's like, no, Texas is big. You need to understand Texas is big. And she's like, okay, whatever. It wasn't until we were driving through Texas and driving that she went, holy crap, Texas is big. It's the same sort of thing. When you go, oh yeah, it saves you money. It's not until you look at your bank transactions, go, holy crap, I spent a lot less money owning an EV than I did owning a gas car. But it's kind of hard to explain that to people until they've experienced it.
I would say, just to double down on that, is when you actually look at the data, this gap between perception and reality is massive. And people, there's a list of things that are just some common things that we could go after, like, oh, how am I going to, this battery is going to be expensive to replace, versus, no, the battery has a warranty, an 8-year, $100,000 warranty, and by the way, the batteries can be serviced just like an engine can. You don't have to replace the battery. This idea of, like, I need to see a charging station, just like I see gas stations, flipping that to, no, the gas station's at my house. It's this carriers thing. Like, there's a lot of these. And again, there's nuances, right? It all comes down to the customer use cases. But what we really see is, for a vast majority of customers, as you mentioned when you opened shop, like, if you have a single-family home and you have a second car, the numbers are a lot higher than 7%. I think it's a matter of closing down some of these gaps, getting people into the dealership to really be able to experience the vehicles, see the value, and make the decision on their own.
Yeah, I mean, home ownership in Nebraska, I'm sorry to pick on Nebraska, if anybody from Nebraska is here, but home ownership in Nebraska is probably around 66%. 2-car ownership is probably somewhere in the range of 40 to 50%, compared to national averages. That would suggest that the ownership percentage should somewhere be around half the market. How do we get there? Terry, any ideas what's working in your market?
Well, again, it's total cost of ownership. It's really scary if you put a pencil to it. The mid part of this country is a lot more ready for the EV market than what we give it credit for. It makes more sense. The savings for a 2-car family at a 50% share of garage it's absolutely phenomenal. And you think about it, if you look at a car that can go 100 miles to work and 100 miles back or 50, and then you have the evening to charge it, you're charging at a lower price because you're doing it even offbeat times. The savings just add up. And that's what we have to educate. That's our job as dealers. The product is good. There are willing customers out there. But as dealers, we have to take it upon ourselves to not only do things like make sure through the dealership, which you can do, is get the government incentives and make sure that the buying process goes smooth and people are confident about what they have purchased.
I got to say that part I actually find kind of difficult to absorb, because what he's talking about is, the dealerships actually sitting down and explaining the benefits of an EV to someone. And I think part of the problem with that is, generally speaking, I don't think dealerships want to sell EVs as much as they want to sell gas cars. So why would they put the effort into selling something that they benefit from the sale less? And how I mean that is, the way the market used to work is they used to make their money off of the markup. Then the internet came out, people got smart, and they were like, hey, I know what your MSRP is, I know what your invoice cost is, I know the kickback you get for selling the vehicle that factors into it as well. So they couldn't really make the money there. So where they've shifted to is dealership slant maintenance facility, and that's where they make their money from. I don't know if anyone's ever looked, but the cost of going to a regular mechanic versus a dealership mechanic is a pretty significant difference. So this is where they make their money. Only thing is, when your vehicle doesn't need maintenance, then where do they make their money? So there isn't a lot of incentive for them to do what he's describing here. It would be a great thing to help people understand EVs and get them into them. but I don't know if the motivation is there to actually do that. It's much easier to just go, never mind, just buy the hybrid. And I think that's what we're seeing a lot of, and probably even more so in the heartland than in the cities.
Well, I was going to say, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it's foundational, but I think the other question would be, why should you? And, someone who's doing the kitchen table math on this, which has a hybrid Sportage or a hybrid Escape or a hybrid RAV4, saying, look, I'm getting 40 miles per gallon. I bought it for 35 or 36,000. It's perfect. I refuel in 8 minutes. Why should I?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Kind of a neat little history point. Back when the second generation Prius came out, I wanted to buy one of those so bad for the, because they were claiming 60 miles per gallon. I was like, that's a massive gas savings. And, I've heard it said, and I think it's a pretty accurate statement, that hybrids are the gateway drug for EVs, because you have somebody who, it's sort of a double-edged sword. You have somebody who has bought a hybrid and they are saving a great deal in gas. It is kind of difficult to explain to them why they would want to take the next step. But if you can go, hey, you know how much you're saving on gas? Imagine saving 100% on gas, right? And then they go, whoa, hold on, wait a minute. Because they already have it in their head that if I'm using less gas, I'm spending less money, right? So if you can take that gas level down to zero, this will get their attention. And I think that's the thing, is they're really easy to be embedded in, hey, I'm already doing a lot to save gas, but if you can explain to them how much more they can save with an EV, that is a kind of an easy push once you actually get their attention on that.
And I think these factors need to be communicated to that buyer. And to your point, like single-family residence with 3 cars, 13 cents per kilowatt hour, that customer is ripe for an EV. And maybe it's incumbent on us to communicate this better.
Yeah, I think that's one thing that dealerships could easily do, and I don't know if they necessarily, if you've put down in the comments if you've seen them do this, but actually put $7,500 off on the window. This is going to get people's attention, right? After they talk to them, of course, they can go, hey, that's from the federal government, plus whatever discounts you get from us. You have somebody who maybe has a $500, $1,000 discount. They throw that up there, throw the $7,500 federal tax credit. If they're in a place that has a state tax credit, you throw that on there too. You can put all these minuses on the windshield, and I promise you it will get people's attention, because I know it's gotten mine. My Nissan Armada, that's literally part of why we bought it, is it said 29,000. It was used 29,000. Marked down to 26 this weekend, only marked down to marked down to 26, and this weekend only marked down to 23. That got my attention, right? So you could do the exact same thing using the federal tax credit, so it's not even their money that they're giving you, but it'll get people's attention. That would probably get people into EVs a lot quicker.
I was going to say, when you're at a kitchen table penciling in your family budget, the average EV loan last year was $52,000. The average new ICE loan was $42,000. So we can say all this, and we know that it's cheaper to own one. It takes a lot of faith for a family to say, okay, I believe that if I pay an extra 25% in my monthly payments, it could be $200 per month. I believe you, but that's $200 a month. I don't believe you $200 a month.
I think I agree with what everyone's saying on the panel. I think TCO is fundamental, right? We all have to feel valued, but I also think it's important to not just look at the situation, right, where you live and you have a single family home, but also look at the motivations. I think that's what we're seeing is there's a lot of different motivations. Someone might be motivated by social responsibility. They might be motivated by the driving experience and the performance. They might be motivated by just overall having the latest, greatest tech. So this is where it's important to kind of have that aggregate view and that average view, but also to go down and really understand those different customer segments and why you come in, what's important to you, so that you're not blasting every single message out to them and say, well, these are all the, but you know exactly what you can focus in on. So that's, I think, an important thing for us to do as an industry, is not just have one single only message, because there are different motivations. the TCO ultimately still has to make sense with what they value in that information. How many trade-offs are they willing to make because of their beliefs or what they're coming in? It's really, really important.
Barry, I want to go to you because you actually sell these cars to people in the areas that we're talking about. I mean, is the buyer between an F-150 XLT and an F-150 Lightning XLT the same person? I mean, are they more environmental minded? Do they have more money? Are they younger? I mean, or are they just the same person who would buy that other car and they're just switching?
Well, I can give you the easy answer, all of the above. Because it is going to be all the above. Your early adapters are going to be your most knowledgeable when they come into a vehicle. And I think the environment has a lot to do with it. And I think when they really have done the research and they come in and they come to the realization is the ownership cycle of an EV is really fantastic, and it does cost less money. If you look at the repair costs, in particularly the Ford batteries, because I know them better, you know, they're modular type batteries, so the battery might not go bad at one time. But think about if you have to replace an engine in a car, if you have to replace a diesel engine, you know, that cost could be anywhere from $12,000 to $20,000. So the powertrain repair or maybe possible costs down the line, but that's the unknown that we will see in the future. They will be able to take these batteries and refine them. They will get better. And then it's like I say, if they have to take the batteries out and they go to rebuilders, then there will be that opportunity probably to have replacement batteries at a lower cost. And I think customers would really appreciate that because once again, most materials in these batteries are recyclable.
One thing that we've seen in the past 5 months of the year as EV sales has sort of plateaued out, there's been a lot more use of incentives to try to bring that price down, to sort of go past TCO just to get past that initial purchase price. Is that making a difference? Maybe Tyson, you could start and then sort of go around the table and see, you know, what's more important, TCO or actual purchase price?
Yeah, I'm not sure what they're going to answer, but for me, TCO is important, but those incentives are really going to do it. Remember my conversation about the windshield? You're already taking off $7,500, and then you take off the state incentives, and then if your company has some financial incentives as well, say another $2,000, you throw that up on the windshield. The more minuses you have on there, the more attention you're going to get. So I get that TCO long term is going to be what keeps them in EVs, but to get somebody who's not too sure about this in the first place to actually really sit down and go, maybe I want to actually try this. Those incentives are going to be, from my opinion, going to be really important. Let's see what they have to say about it, though. Oh, and what do you think? Put that down below.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough question because it may depend on each person, but I mean, what we see in terms of incentives and price discounting is that it doesn't work the same on EVs as it does on everything else. We see very low response rates to EV price cuts than we would see on a comparable ICE vehicle. And a lot of it has to do with the geographic distribution, that middle America is not buying EVs, so if you have an incentive, middle America is not going to produce the same as it does on the coast. When it comes to discounting, what we really see the biggest difference on is the pen rates of the incentive. And since the current legislation really favors leasing.
I don't know if the current administration so much does prefer it. It does, however. I do have to say that the Inflation Reduction Act, though, definitely does make it a more logical option, right? Because there are vehicles who don't qualify for the tax rebate if you buy them, but you can still qualify. And I don't know if that was necessarily, I suppose it would have to be intentional, but I don't know that it was necessarily intending to put people into leases, though that is definitely going to be the end result. No two ways about that. I think the benefit of leases, though, is you actually move the market forward more. I'm not a fan of leases, but if somebody does a 2-year lease, they can take advantage of that tax credit where they might not have before. And then, of course, if the vehicle is cheap enough, it now is qualified for the used vehicle tax incentive of $4,000. So you can kind of get a good double whammy on that in pretty quick succession. But the vehicle has to start out low enough to depreciate into a range that actually qualifies, because it can't be more than $2,500. And if you're talking about an $80,000 EV, in 2 years its resale is not going to be $25,000. God, I hope not. All right.
Let's be honest, it does. We see a very big response to leasing and a lot of EV consumers moving that way. I mean, they follow the money, it just makes sense.
The other thing too, that's a factor in this is units in operation. So on the coasts, we've been selling EVs since 2010, 2012, and just the sheer number of EVs that are in the market is about 2.6 million. In the Heartland, it's about 640,000, 650,000. So there's more people. The market size for the coast is much, much bigger. There's more people who are coming back to buy new cars, or lease new cars in this case. So that's another important factor. And I think Mark, you put it right earlier that somebody who's on the cusp of buying, trading in, a Mach-E for an EV6, will be pleased to see the incentive. That guy who's on the cusp and he's thinking about it. Somebody who is in the Heartland, the Midwest, who's never bought an EV before, that's a big leap. So I think that aligns with what you're saying too.
Yeah, and it's really important factor, right? When the perceptual gaps I talked about before, when you look at them over time, the closer you get to ownership, and even through ownership, they start to close, and all of a sudden the whole equation changes. So what it takes is those owners, those people that you know that have one, that can tell you, like, trust me, you want to try this, and have that, give them the assurance. And of course, on the coast, when there's already that UIO, you have those conversations at your barbecues and so on. And it's a little bit, there's less of those opportunities because there's less ownership in the Heartland. So a propagation delay of word of mouth, I think is natural in those markets. We need to amplify that, I think, as an industry. And again, it's about getting them into the dealerships, getting them to see and experience the vehicle and have those direct conversations.
I mean, that's a fair point. I mean, we've had a lot more time selling EVs, as you can say, but I think we've talked a lot about what dealers are doing, what car makers are doing, what the analysts are seeing. We don't have anybody from Charge America, ChargePoint, Electrify America, or Supercharging Network up here. I mean, and what we've talked about, charging anxiety. I mean, does that make a difference? Is that what's holding us back at all?
I think because of all the noise on social media, it is a little bit, but once they go through the process of understanding that 80, 85, I believe it's probably 90% charging takes place at home, but everybody wants to sit there and tell about the horror stories. I went to plug in and it didn't work in Chicago and it got cold, places like that. I think those are fewer and fewer far between. I just want to hit back at what they said initially, getting people into the EVs. We're starting to see the cycle of trade-ins. And that's starting to make a big difference in the affordability area. And Ford does have a certified pre-owned vehicle that you can do with the EVs, and it makes sense at a fair interest rate. And it's much better for the entry-level EV buyer to get into.
Yeah, I think that's an important point. I think that the used EVs are really going to be what helps push people there. Because again, the price of getting into the vehicle is the really difficult one. And if you're doing previously owned vehicles and the price is lower, that makes it a little less scary to make that leap into owning an EV. So I would agree with him completely on this.
So we've taken steps at the dealer end to be able to get people into the first-time buyers into affordable vehicles. Hopefully down the line, just like a hybrid buyer or anybody, will step up to the next evolution of an EV.
Any thoughts about charging?
Well, yeah, I was going to go back to, the state of Washington's a really interesting example of kind of how to do it, because that state is number 2 next to California in terms of EV pen rate. But if you dig into it a little bit and you look at the number of cars per charger, and even dig a little deeper and go the number of cars per 150 kW charger, it's low. And in other words, there's a lot of chargers, and that gives people lots of confidence And so I think that's a really important factor in this, right? If you're, that's
Well, who's responsible for that? Who's going to fix that problem for you guys? Is that something the car makers have to do? That's something
it's a little of both. I own it.
Well, that's our time. Thank you very much, gentlemen. I think we had a good conversation. I don't think we solved the world problems yet, but thank you.
Thank you, Sean.
Thank you.
All right. Well, that was the takeaway. I think for me, the big thing where that I didn't think of beforehand when I wasn't too interested in this topic was I didn't really take into account one really important thing that they haven't talked about. And that is when we talk about the cost of an EV, one of the big struggles that legacy manufacturers have had, particularly Ford and Chevy, is making the EVs and still making a profit. You have things like Ford is talking about losing like 50% of the cost of an EV or a Mach-E. 50% of the cost, they're above what they're selling it for, they're losing, right? So they sell a $60,000 car and they're losing $30,000 on it. And the reason for this is that they lack the economies of scale because they aren't able to sell them in great enough numbers to push the price down for each unit. And the more regions that they have people purchasing EVs, the lower the price goes across the market. So when you have middle America only having a take rate of 3%, that leaves a lot of economy of scale out there that you're not going to get. So I do think that we get the cities like San Diego, LA, stuff like that, California. That's great, big populations. And they are buying a lot of EVs. The take rate's really high. But if you have large portions of a country that it's super low, that's going to keep the companies, the legacy manufacturers, from getting the economies of scale they need to push the price down across the board, which will, of course, as the price goes down, adoption rate will go up. So it'll be a sort of self-accelerating thing. All right, that's it for here. Let me know if you have any comments down below. Love to hear from you. I'll be doing the next video in this series. I have about 6 or 7 of them, and then I'll do the Electrify Expo summary video, and then we'll get back to my video series of Do EV Suck? So look forward to that. All right, keep an eye out. In the meantime, have a great day.